Welcome. You've arrived at another quiet exploration of history. Tonight, we will journey back to the Second World War, and in particular, to the vast and unforgiving front that stretched across Eastern Europe. This was the Eastern Front, a place where soldiers endured endless cold, hunger, and exhaustion, and where battles were measured not just in victories, but in survival from one day to the next. So, let us begin. Imagine yourself walking quietly into the distant winter of 1942. The air is still heavy with cold. The land stretches wide and empty. And in that emptiness, men dig into the earth, creating trenches that will become their homes. Picture yourself waking to the sound of boots on frozen ground. Around you is the faint, constant crunch of snow mixed with mud. A sound that repeats endlessly, morning after morning. The trench you live in is not deep enough to feel safe, and not dry enough to feel comfortable. The walls are slick with frost, and in places, lined with crude wooden planks scavenged from barns or villages now reduced to rubble. The cold is relentless, seeps into the fabric of your coat, stiffens your gloves, and makes your breath hang like mist in the air. At night, temperatures fall so low that sleep feels like drifting on the edge of ice. A blanket, stiff with damp, offers little relief. You are never warm, not truly. Your boots are heavy, but they are never dry. They carry the memory of yesterday's march through slush and today's standing still in snow. Inside, your feet ache from the constant dampness. This is the rhythm of life here, a rhythm of waiting, standing, stamping your feet to stay alive. Food arrives irregularly. Sometimes there's only thin soup made from cabbage and potatoes that taste of the earth they grew in. Sometimes there's nothing until the next day, when a supply wagon manages to push through. Bread is black, dense, often shared between too many hands. You chew it slowly, not for the taste, but to stretch the moment before hunger returns. The air carries many smells, the sharp tang of smoke from small fires, the sour scent of unwashed wool and sweat, the ever-present dampness of soil, like a heavy blanket that clings to everything. These become normal, the background of existence. The hours pass slowly. Morning blends into afternoon, and afternoon fades into long nights, where the horizon glows faintly with the flash of distant shell fire. You huddle down, adjusting your scarf, listening for sounds that break the monotony, the shuffle of men beside you, the call of an officer, the distant echo of engines you cannot see. There is little conversation. Words are saved, spoken quietly, often about home, about bread ovens in villages far away, about children left behind, about fields that once gave harvests instead of battle. The rhythm of memory becomes as important as the rhythm of survival. You would not last long in this place. Few do. The days are measured in endurance, in keeping your body upright despite hunger and cold, in keeping your eyes open despite exhaustion. Every sunrise feels the same. Every sunset only a pause before another night of shivering. And yet, men lived this way for weeks, months, sometimes years. Their lives became bound to the trench, to its smells, its sounds, its narrow horizon. It was not life as we know it, but something smaller, reduced to the essentials of staying alive, one slow day at a time. From the trenches where countless nameless men endured, let us turn to a single figure whose story has echoed down the decades. Her name was Lyudmila Pavlichenko, and she became known by a title both chilling and strangely poetic, Lady Death. Imagine her first not as a legend, but as a young woman. Born in Ukraine in 1916, before the war, she lived a life not unlike many others. She studied history at university. She played sports, enjoyed books, and thought about a future that seemed ordinary, perhaps even predictable. And yet, when Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, her life shifted into something extraordinary. Lyudmila had already trained in marksmanship as a hobby. She was skilled with a rifle, steady in her hands, and calm in her focus. When the call for volunteers came, she stepped forward, not to type reports or work in a factory, but to serve as a sniper. At that time, it was still unusual for women to fight on the front lines, yet she insisted, and she was accepted. Her days became defined not by classrooms or lectures, but by the long, patient stillness of waiting for a target. She learned to melt into the landscape, to use earth, leaves, and snow to disguise her presence. Hours could pass in silence, with only her breath in her ears and the slow beating of her heart. In those stretches of quiet, she was invisible, a part of the terrain. When the moment came, she was decisive. Over time, her reputation grew. Reports speak of more than 300 enemy soldiers claimed by her rifle. The number itself is haunting, but behind it lay the reality of her discipline. Lying still in mud, through heat and bitter cold, holding a position until her body ached from stillness. She was not untouched by the danger. More than once, she came under fire herself. She endured injury, and she watched comrades fall around her. And yet she returned to her post again and again, guided by duty, persistence, and the strange rhythm of the sniper's life. What made her story unusual was not only her skill, but how she was remembered. The Soviet Union elevated her as a symbol, a figure who embodied courage. Photographs of her in uniform, holding her rifle, circulated as propaganda. She was sent abroad during the war, visiting the United States and Britain, where she gave speeches urging support for the Soviet effort. In Washington, she stood beside Eleanor Roosevelt, the First Lady of the United States, an image that startled many who had never imagined a young woman could be one of the war's most feared snipers. Despite the legend, beneath the uniform, she remained a young woman who bore scars from the front. Later in life, she returned quietly to her studies, working as a historian. Her wartime experiences now behind her, though never forgotten. When we think of Lyudmila Pavlichenko, it is easy to focus only on the numbers, on the haunting title she carried. But her life tells us something else, about how ordinary people, caught in extraordinary circumstances, were transformed by the Eastern Front. She was one of many, each with a story, each enduring the same endless cold, the same hunger, the same uncertainty. Her biography connects us back to those trenches. For while she rose into fame, she too slept on frozen ground, ate from the same thin rations, and endured the same exhausting rhythm of waiting and surviving. Her fame may have set her apart, but her endurance tied her to the thousands who lived and died around her. And so, as we leave her story, let us walk once again into the landscape itself. Beyond the individuals, beyond the legends, the Eastern Front holds countless secrets still buried in its soil. Mysteries and remains that continue to whisper from beneath the earth. The Eastern Front was not only a battlefield of daily struggle and individual stories, it was also a landscape that absorbed the weight of history, holding onto it in the soil, in the forests, and in the quiet fields. Long after the war ended, the earth continued to yield reminders of what had taken place, relics of lives interrupted, and the silent presence of those who never returned home. One of the most haunting examples lies at Kursk. In the summer of 1943, this region became the site of one of the largest and most decisive battles of the war, the Battle of Kursk. It was vast in scale, involving millions of men, thousands of tanks, and endless artillery. For weeks, the land echoed with fire and then fell silent.
Oh.
But silence did not mean emptiness. Imagine the fields after the fighting ceased. Wide open stretches of farmland, scarred by trenches, craters, and wreckage. Villages reduced to husks of walls. Got the air heavy, not with sound, but with the absence of it. Beneath that soil, in shallow graves or scattered across the ground, lay thousands of men, Soviet and German alike, who had fallen in the Great Clash. For decades after, farmers in the region unearthed fragments each spring, a rusted helmet here, a corroded cartridge there, sometimes the bent remains of a tank tread emerging from the earth, and sometimes far more solemn discoveries, the bones of soldiers resting where they had fallen. Archaeologists and volunteers began to document these finds, especially after the fall of the Soviet Union, when research became more open. Mass graves were uncovered, their contents carefully studied, cataloged, and, whenever possible, identified. Some soldiers still carried small tokens, a pocket watch, a wedding band, a set of dog tags. These objects became faint bridges to their identities, to the lives they once led. Yet, for many, no names could be attached. Thousands remain unknown, their remains reburied in communal cemeteries marked only by a shared memorial. To walk among these places today is to feel both presence and absence. The presence of so many lives once lived, and the absence of their voices, their stories, which ended so abruptly. There are mysteries still. Not all the graves have been found. Local folklore sometimes speaks of hidden burial sites, entire units lost in forests or swamps, their resting places untouched for decades. Occasionally, excavations reveal anomalies, trenches filled not only with soldiers, but with horses, equipment, even civilians caught in the tides of war. These discoveries remind us how layered the Eastern Front was, and how much remains beneath the surface. Standing at Kursk today, the land looks calm. Fields grow wheat, villages stand rebuilt, and roads hum with traffic. But beneath the quiet surface lies a memory that cannot be erased. The soil itself has become a record, holding onto fragments of steel, bone, and memory, and revealing them slowly, year after year. In this way, the Eastern Front is not simply a past event. It is a continuing presence, a conversation between the living and the long dead, carried out through the work of archaeologists, historians, and local people who stumble upon a rusted buckle or a shard of glass. And so, as we consider these mysteries and discoveries, let us shift once more. We have seen the trenches of ordinary men, the life of a sniper, the quiet revelations of archaeology. Now, let us step out of the mud entirely, and into the spaces where officers dined and talked, far from the frost-bitten trenches, where the war was experienced in comfort, even as others endured the cold. While the vast majority of soldiers on the Eastern Front endured hunger, cold, and exhaustion, there were others who experienced the same war in a very different way. Their world was not the frozen trench, but the warmth of a commandeered farmhouse, a requisitioned school building, or sometimes a grand manor house. Here, in officers' mess halls, life was lived at a slower, more comfortable rhythm. Imagine stepping into one of these spaces. The walls, though cracked and faded, have been hung with maps and banners. The long wooden tables are covered in cloth, sometimes white, sometimes merely clean enough to distinguish them from the dirt outside. Candles or lanterns burn softly, filling the room with a steady glow. The air is warmer here, heated by stoves or fireplaces, the smell of wood smoke mingling with the aroma of food. Meals, while not always abundant, were noticeably richer than the rations of ordinary soldiers. Officers dined on bread that was softer, meat that had been set aside for them, butter, cheese, and occasionally even wine or schnapps, confiscated from the surrounding countryside. These meals were not feasts, but in contrast to the trenches, they seemed luxurious. Conversation filled the air. Men in pressed uniforms discussed orders, logistics, and strategy, but also lighter subjects, letters from home, the progress of the war elsewhere, the possibility of leave. Laughter sometimes echoed, though it often carried a forced, weary quality. For beneath the warmth of these rooms, the officers knew that outside, only a few miles away, their soldiers endured frost and fire. The mess hall served not just as a dining space, but as a kind of refuge. Here, officers could step away, if only briefly, from the constant presence of mud, lice, and fatigue. The tables became stages where authority was performed, where hierarchy was reinforced. Senior officers sat at the head, their voices commanding attention, while younger men listened, learned, and occasionally whispered among themselves. Yet even in these halls, the war was never absent. Maps sprawled across tabletops reminded them of the next advance, the next retreat. The sound of distant artillery sometimes rattled windows. Orders were written and signed in the same room where plates were cleared. The contrast was stark. A hot meal swallowed quickly, followed by the cold reality of stepping back into command of men who had no such comfort. There was also a peculiar dissonance in these spaces. Outside, peasants starved, villages burned, and the earth froze with the weight of winter. Inside, officers smoked cigars, sipped strong drink, and spoke of victory. The luxury was real, but it was never complete. Shadows of the wider war pressed in through every door and window. If you close your eyes and imagine, you can almost hear it. The low murmur of voices over the steady crackle of a stove. The clink of glass against glass. The scratching of pens on paper as reports were written. The scraping of chairs across wooden floors as men rose to leave. Buttoning coats, pulling on gloves, preparing to return to the frozen line. The officers' mess halls remind us of the contrasts of war. Two worlds existed side by side. One of mud and hunger, another of warmth and relative comfort. Both were bound to the same front, to the same struggle, and both were swallowed eventually by the tide of history. And now, having walked through all these perspectives, the endless trench, the story of a single sniper, the silent graves beneath the soil, and the mess halls of command, we can begin to step back, gently, into reflection. We have reached the end of our quiet journey along the Eastern Front. Together, we have walked through the trenches, feeling the damp earth beneath our boots and the cold air in our lungs. We have followed the path of Lyudmila Pavlichenko, whose patience and skill turned her into a figure both feared and remembered. We have paused among the silent fields of Kursk, where the soil still holds its secrets. And we have stepped into the warmth of officers' mess halls, where maps and meals coexisted with the weight of command. The Eastern Front was a place of extremes, of suffering and endurance, of hunger and discipline, of silence and noise. For those who lived it, the days were long, the nights longer still, and survival itself was uncertain. Yet, in remembering their lives, we connect not only with hardship, but also with the enduring strength of human beings in the face of overwhelming odds. As you rest now, you may find yourself grateful for the softness of the present moment. The warmth of your room, the comfort of your bed, the steady rhythm of your breath, all of these stand in quiet contrast to the frozen trenches, the ration lines, and the empty fields of the past. Let the weight of history settle gently in your thoughts, like snow falling on a silent plain. You do not need to hold on to every detail. You can simply let the images drift. A distant trench, a young sniper's gaze, a field that remembers what has passed. They can fade softly, leaving only calm. And so, the story closes here. The past remains where it belongs. Behind us, quiet, enduring, unchanging. We're here in this moment, at rest. Allow yourself to sink deeper into stillness, to let go of thought, to welcome sleep. Good night.